Hello, this is Fritz-Ay says, and welcome back to One Last Night. Sorry for the shorter episode last time. Turns out I had a bacterial infection in my lung. Yeah, not so nice. My voice was kind of killing me after that, but I'm doing better now, and I'm looking forward to catching up with everything. So we took a different turn and explored some new characters in the story last week. It seemed like almost a flashback, but not quite. I don't know. It was definitely within the year of since the apocalypse hit. But I don't know. That was a crazy faded with butterflies going everywhere. But yeah. Let's go ahead and get started and see if we get back with the main cast. Dear Marshall, why does it still hurt, even after all this time? It's been over a year since I saw him last. I thought I would have been fine by now. He ruined so much for me, and I've worked so hard to heal those scars, to move on. Yet, whenever I hear his name or think of his face, I'm filled with an unbridled anger. The way things left off between us was so unsatisfactory, so emotionally raw, that it still hurts to remember. He betrayed me without a second thought, like he never even fucking cared about me. I wish he would have talked to me, given us a chance to talk things out. Instead, I was met with a wall. He seemed so uninterested, so emotionally dead. It was like he'd stopped caring about our relationship long ago. After that argument, I just packed up my shit and left without another word. Don't get me wrong, I'm more than happy that I had found you. You have been nothing but a light in my life. There is nobody in this world I love more than you, Marshall. But a wound left untreated is bound to fester. He left me with so many regrets and doubts that I'm not sure I'll ever get the answers to. I never want to see him again, and I want to sit down and talk things out all at the same time. It's so confusing and clear all at once. It's frustrating that I can't just be happy with my present and my future. The past just knows how to dig its claws in and never let go. One day, I hope I can sort things out with him. Just knowing the answers to these questions engraved in my brain should be enough to stave off the hurt. For now, I'll take it one day at a time. Recovery is a process, after all. At least I have you to help me through it, my love. I know you'll always be there to support me. The first step I should take, though, is saying his name. I've avoided it this whole entry to try and keep some semblance of control over my emotions. It's baby steps, but anything is progress at this point. Better to confront my demons now than have them berate me later. I'll sign off now. I got some stress baking to do. I think some croissants should do nicely. See you soon, my beloved. Love, Dorian. P.S. Dear Alistair, if you ever read this, go fuck yourself. It's hard to keep proper track of time when you can't see anything. Granted, what little light that does shine through the fabric of the bag on my head helps, but it seems to drag on forever. From the amount of times we've stopped to sleep, this is probably our third day of walking since the ambush, and it was getting dark already. After the bandits had downed us with chloroform, I'd woken up a few minutes later with something over my head and a massive headache. Part of me wishes the chloroform did work how it had in the movies, then the fuckers would have had to carry us out of there for hours. Instead, our hands were tied behind our backs, our pockets searched, and we were forced to walk blindly. Said binding also served as a lead so we couldn't flee. They slept in shifts, making sure to watch us at all times. Any attempts I made to free myself, or for either Xavier or I to talk to each other, were met with swift physical punishment. Our captors could only do so much, considering we still had to be able to walk, but they made what little they could do count. For now, it was easier to eavesdrop and glean what info I could before we reached our destination. What I had learned so far was that we were en route to their home base somewhere further into the city and close to the lake. The route we were taking was the safest one, but not the fastest. They didn't want to risk encountering any fated or potential wannabe heroes. I wasn't sure for how long, but it was clear that they'd been stalking the outside of Haven, waiting to capture more prisoners like us. The new info only brought more questions to mind. Why did they want prisoners anyways? Was it enough to steal from people? All of this was, of course, for their boss, who they frustratingly hadn't said the name of. Maybe they had some kind of taboo over saying it. I heard of stranger things in these post-apocalyptic groups. I stumbled suddenly, starting myself out of my thoughts, as I barely caught my balance. I barely had anything to go off of right now, but that would have to be enough. I needed to keep myself focused. It didn't help that each minute that passed steadily built up the anxiety in my chest. Wherever we were headed, it wasn't good. I listened intently for the next few minutes, trying to hear anything of interest being discussed. Unfortunately, the set topic was about gambling. Poker certainly wasn't going to set me free. The conversation was growing intense. The group seemingly focused on winning the argument. Maybe this was my chance to speak to Xavier. We had to get out of this. I drifted closer to the sound of footsteps walking next to me. I spoke towards him in a hushed tone, my voice raspy after not having been used for a while and with barely any water given to me. "Hey, Xavier. You alright?" I heard a small inhale next to me before the familiar voice whispered back. "I don't really know. I'm scared and trying to process it all. You?" "Trying to be. Don't fret, kid. We'll be alright. Listen for my signal." "How I know what to..." His words were cut off by an impact, followed by a sudden wheeze. "Haven't you two learned your lesson about shutting the fuck up?" I felt a surge of anger rush through me at the sound. "Hey! I was the one who started the conversation, not him." "Look at you, taking all the blame. What a hero you are." My words were cut off as I felt the air leave my body, the impact of a fist forcing it out of me violently, leaving me doubled over in pain. Stars danced in my hood, and I struggled to recover from the blow. I wasn't given the comfort of catching my breath, as a hard boot to my back sent me toppling forward to the ground. I curled myself into a ball, making myself smaller on instinct in an attempt to fill my lungs with oxygen again. My chest burned from the strikes. Better to focus on me than Xavier, though. I could hear our captors laughing at me, delighting in my suffering. The media was right. The apocalypse does bring out the worst in some people. My arms were jerked upward as my lead was tugged. "Get up already! We're finally here!" I used what little movement capabilities I had to push myself into a sitting position, just barely getting my legs under my feet to stand. We walked forward a short distance before we stopped, the female bandit's voice raised to speak to the others. "Wait here a minute. I'll let them know we're here so the boss can come and see our haul." Her footsteps moved away from us, leaving Xavier and I with the remaining two bandits. This was our last chance to try something. Anxiety reached its peaks, stress spreading throughout my body as I let my flight instincts take over. I had to act now. Grabbing the rope behind me, I tugged it forward suddenly and felt it slack as the bandit was brought closer to me. I took a big step and flung my head backwards, hoping for the best. I felt the crunch of his nose as it impacted against my skull. "Fuck!" The rope dropped as he let go from shock, an opportunity I used to kick backward and send him onto his ass. I could do this. I could get us free. There were sounds of a scuffle next to me, Xavier having realized that was the signal. As fast as I could manage, I grabbed the rope and... My movements were halted entirely as a loud and sudden cry of pain resounded from the direction of the other bandit. I had never heard him yell like that before, It was unmistakably Xavier. Take another fucking step, and another of your boyfriend's fingers gets broken. Understand? I stood frozen from the shock of it all, the adrenaline leaving my body as reality set in. Of course they'd use him against me. What other tactic did these scum have? I stood still as the remaining fight left my body, replaced with guilt as Xavier softly whimpered over his broken finger. As much as I wanted to reason with myself that it was a worthwhile attempt, it had gotten us nowhere. We were still captured by a group of bandits, and now Xavier was injured for whatever was to come. I heard the grunts from my captors standing up behind me as I readied myself for whatever harm was to come. You're gonna pay for that, you Hey! For once I was thankful for her return. She seemed to be more reasonable than the other two, but her punches always hit the hardest. Don't damage the goods any further! They're the last two we need! A frustrated sigh came from the second bandit, and I could feel his eyes boring a hole through the bag. Don't fucking try anything. That applies to all of you. Now let's go. We don't want to keep the boss waiting. The rope binding my hands was raised as we started moving forward, an annoyed rumbling in the air mixing with the sound of our footsteps. The ground beneath our feet changed to something harder as the resonance shifted. We were led into a building as echoes of our conversation grew louder the deeper we went. The only way out of this was through. Whatever came next, we'd have to face it head on, one way or another. A door scraped against the floor in front of us as we were met with the sounds of whoops and cheering. I heard slivers of comments from the people around us. A bright orange light shone through the bag from the distance, growing brighter with each step and adding to the crackling of fire into the mix. They all were excited for our arrival, looking forward to whatever they had planned to do with us. Some even muttered about taking bets. I hated being the center of attention like this. Whenever a speech had to be delivered at Haven, another member of the council would always have to handle it. Something about having to stand up in front of a group of people and speak robbed my mind of anything I had planned to say, even if it was written down in front of me. Social anxiety is a bitch. The crowd began to quiet as a set of heavy footsteps entered the room. The sound echoed purpose and pride, the person they belonged to knowing they dominated the space. Next to them was a softer pair, clearly meant to be less noticeable to the first, an advisor, a second in command. The room came to a hush, as who I presumed was the leader stopped in front of Xavier and I. We were pushed roughly to our knees before them, meant to kneel before the person who would decide our fate. My, it seems we have some valuable new merchandise on our hands. The voice seemed to fill the room, loud and coarse, with slight twinges of a foreign accent. The depth of it only helped command my attention, a natural-born leader. Except I was more focused on my blood beginning to run cold, my body going still. I was all too familiar with this voice. Footsteps moved around us as he inspected our bodies. They're in good condition, too. I'm sure they'll put on quite an entertaining show. He stopped behind us. Though the injured finger on this one might prove troublesome. Cal, make a note to have him treated before tomorrow. Yes, sir. The scratching of a pen from where the softer steps had paused indicated Cal was the person accompanying him. As he made his way back before us, I could hear the grin on his voice as he spoke. As you may already know, with the addition of these two wonderful specimens, we finally have enough recruits for the next round of Wonderland. Cheers erupted from around the room, bandits celebrating before being quieted once more. I look forward to seeing each and every one of you there, and thank you for the three who brought them here. Excellent work. He started clapping. The other joined in a round of applause. He was treating this entire thing as though it were a performance, as if there were a circus and he was the ringleader, and we were the freaks on display for the adoring crowd. I always knew he liked being the center of attention, but hearing him like this was sickening.
Now, without further ado, what say you all greet our guest properly?
With confirmation from the crowd, he took a step to my right where Xavier stood, and there was a brief rustle of fabric.
Such a handsome face to be greeted with. I was right in believing he'd be a star, folks. Tell me, young one, how shall your friends be addressing you tomorrow?
Everything was silent as they anticipated Xavier's response, but none came. Good kid. Don't give them anything to work with.
Well, would you look at that? We've got ourselves a shy boy with us. Maybe he'd be more willing to talk with some motivation.
He circled around once more, and Xavier let out a cry of pain again.
So he does speak. I'll ask you again, dear friend, so this finger of yours isn't marred any further. What is your name?
There was another silence before the belt yelled out his response.
Xavier! My name is Xavier. Give it up for Xavier the Bat, everyone!
The applause sounded once more as I readied myself for what I knew was next.
Dear Xavier, since our only guest here, however, how about we see what's behind bag number 2?
The air was heavy with anticipation, as the attention was drawn solely to me. I dreaded this moment for years, mentally preparing for the day it would have inevitably come. I practiced what to say, what to do, how to react, everything I could think of for when we finally met again. And there was an apocalypse, and I had more important priorities than settling things with him. I wasn't even sure I wanted to see him again, though a part of me was hoping for it. Yet here we were, in a situation I couldn't have ever predicted. As the bat slid off my head, my eyes adjusted to the light, I brought my gaze up to look into the eyes that had haunted my memories for years and spoke.
Hello, Alistair.
Everything remained silent as I waited for a response, punctuated by the shock on Alistair's face as he stared at me.
It's been what? A little over 3 years since we last spoke?
I knew I should be taking stock of my surroundings, trying to learn everything I could about where I was and what was happening. Instead, all my brain could focus on was the anger starting to burn in my chest at seeing him again. The rage that had spent so many years simmering just beneath the surface started to boil over. My eyes not wanting to leave his face, I watched as the shock was replaced with a smug laugh as he pieced together his composure.
Holy shit! Dorian! Is it really you?
I couldn't help but sigh, his face transforming into the smirk I'd grown to hate. Unfortunately for the both of us, it is.
I admit, you got me good there. I really thought you would have died by now. You were basically a glorified house husband, last I heard. What was his name? Michael?
Well, times and people change if you haven't noticed. For example, I wasn't expecting to meet you again after being kidnapped by your cronies.
All's fair in love and war, though. You taught me that.
I rolled my eyes at the lion. You always did love trying to use my words against me. I have to say, though, the leader of a bunch of assholes does suit you perfectly, even dressed for the occasion. I gestured my hand at the length of him, from the piercing on his lower maw to the corset to the tight black pants.
And you always did look better when you were on your knees for me. And look, your hair is already tied back.
An involuntary grunt of disgust escaped my lips.
How have you been, though? I thought you and that wolf were doing quite well. Did he leave you already, or did he die to get away from you? Either way, I see you move on fast.
He gestured vaguely to the bat next to me, the seething in my chest reaching an apex as I struggled to contain it. He's out there. I just need to find him.
Ah, still as delusional as ever, I see. Your devotedness would almost be inspiring if it wasn't so sad. And how about you? Still alone as ever, trying to make yourself seem important? I see that's why you've surrounded yourself by a bunch of nobodies. If not you, they'd easily find some other shit show to worship. In case you forgot, you're replaceable. I could see the twitch in Alistair's eyebrow at my words. Direct hit. Before he could break the facade, however, a hand set itself on his shoulder.
Sir.
I'd nearly forgotten about the other people in the room, whispering confusedly to each other and trying to figure out what was going on. I wanted to look at Xavier, but my eyes fixed themselves on Alistair's assistant instead. I'd only ever met one palace cat in my life, and I wasn't ever going to forget him. He looked significantly different now, though. I remember his features being perfectly symmetrical before, but now he was scarred. A jagged streak ran its way down his cheek, while the other was straight down his face, crossing over his unseeing eye. What was strange, though, was that they were distinctly burn scars. It begged the question, were they intentional? Before I could try and provoke either of them again, a cough from Xavier drew the attention of the room back to him.
So, do you two know each other? Unfortunately.
There was more silence as neither of us explained further.
How?
I let out a sigh as I spoke up before he could.
Xavier, this is Alistair. My ex.
His eyes went wide as his mouth opened and closed repeatedly, trying to find the words to convey anything about this situation. A smile finally crossed my face at that. He usually always had something to say, but seeing this grounded me again. I found myself grateful for his presence. Even tied helpless and kneeling on the ground, he found a way to help.
Sorry about that unexpected little part of the show, everyone.
Alistair's voice commanded everyone's gaze once more, the showman's inflection to it doing its well-practiced job.
As you all have just witnessed, our latest contender has revealed himself to be none other than my ex-boyfriend. If someone as horribly plain as this man once had a shot, what's to say none of you might too?
A red flushed on my cheeks, whether from embarrassment, fury, or both, I wasn't entirely sure.
You and I both...
I couldn't finish my words before I was met with a quick and decisive backhand from Alistair. My cheeks stung as he lowered his voice, looking me directly in the eyes, all hints of amusement left.
Quiet now. This is my show, not yours.
I shivered at the cold tone, the harshness catching me off guard. Immediately, he continued past my outburst as though nothing had happened. Something else was off, though. I couldn't put my finger on it yet. Alistair had always been a callous, controlling asshole, but this was different. Concerning.
With that being said, let's wrap this show up.
He turned to the two of us, both he and Cal staring down at where we knelt. The attention of the rest of the bandits focused on us with nary a whisper. That's when the pieces clicked together in my brain. His eyes. When we were talking before, after the shock of my reveal, and his eyes portrayed the Alistair I once dated, the one I'd spent nearly 2 years of my life with, I thought the whole act I'd been hearing was just that of a show, something he'd used to lead these people and keep them in line. Though when our eyes met, it was like there was someone else looking back. I could see traces of the person I once knew, yet it was like another person was in control of his actions. By instinct, I focused my attention to the only other person who had met him as if looking for some kind of confirmation. From the one time I'd met him, Cal had worn a neutral expression and hadn't been very expressive. That seemed that it hadn't changed. He studied my face for a moment as if he could understand what I was thinking, and gave me a nod so slight I might have imagined it. was going on here? Alistair had been speaking the whole time, but I only tuned in again as his speech was coming to a close.
As the leader of our group, I formally welcome you to your new home for what will be the foreseeable future. We are the Ignited, the flames that rose from the ashes of our tarnished world to bring our own order to the chaos. We are what this world needs to bring forth a better future. You're both lucky and privileged to be able to join us here today. Hopefully, one day, you may see our ways and join us, to bear the mark of the enlightened like the rest.
Sounds of fabric shuffling surrounded us as each individual bore a burn scar, showcasing their membership. This was more than some banditry. These people were fucking insane. It was nearing cult territory, and that thought alone was terrifying. More so by the fact that we were their prisoners.
May the fates deal your hand wisely.
With those final words, cheers of excitement erupted around the room. Alistair turned his attention to the guards that had brought us in.
See them to their new cells, preferably on different floors. Take them back to our medic first and trade his finger.
Without another word, he turned and began walking away.
Alistair, we aren't through here!
My voice left my throat before I could even process the words I was saying.
You'll regret treating me like shit again. I refuse to lose to a villain like you.
Alistair paused at the exit doors, turning back for a moment with that same smirk.
Oh, Dorian. Always so dramatic. Whoever said you were the hero?
And then he was gone. A turn of fabric and the lion stalked away. Cal followed behind him obediently, not looking back. My lead was tugged as the bandits forced me to my feet again, following the instructions their leader had left. Quickly, I looked for Xavier, trying to find him amongst the chaos. When I finally did, a scared look was plastered on his face. I tried to will myself to say something motivational, to find the words to tell him everything was going to be all right. The shock of the past few moments had left my mind blank, the rage seeping out of it and taking any comfort I could give the young bat with it. The next instant, we were dragged in opposite directions, losing sight of the other in the crowd. I wasn't sure when we'd see each other next, but my best guess was at whatever was happening tomorrow. I felt the anxiety building again, the fear of the situation kicking in. Most of all, what I felt was guilt at not saying anything to Xavier. But if I didn't have hope for the future myself, what was the point of lying to him? I didn't really know what to expect when they said they were going to put us in cells, but it certainly wasn't including a family photo out of them. I flipped through the pages, watching the lives of these strangers as they first met, got married, and had 3 kids together. Where they were now was anybody's guess, but hopefully they weren't locked in an abandoned storage unit. When the bandits had led me through the halls, they thankfully hadn't placed that old bag over my head. I'd gotten a good glimpse of my surroundings. It looked like we were residing in one of those self-storage facilities, each room serving as a bedroom, a cell, or their intended purpose of storage. It was impossible to know what kind of things had gathered here over the years, but there were enough I saw on my walk to distract myself a bit. The cell they had thrown me in had a box after box of pictures from various families, illuminated by the small lantern they had given me to see. It was one of the 3 useful things I'd been given, the other 2 being a lidded bucket for personal business and a decently sized blanket. Home sweet home. I picked another album up and began flipping through it. A pang of sadness grew in my chest, knowing that I no longer had any photos of my loved ones. Tears began to well up in my eyes, blurring my vision. I tried to blink them back, but it was too late now as they spilled over and wet my face. And they only died twice this week after 2 separate fated encounters, one of which I'd stupidly left my spear behind, and now I'd been kidnapped by my ex. The same ex who clearly had plans for me that I didn't know, and was also running a bandit cult, and no clue why Haven had tried to contact me. I didn't even know if Xavier was safe. I ended up getting his finger broken in the process of everything, and all my efforts to try and be some kind of hero had only been a hindrance. I owed a lot to the Bat for sticking with and helping me through the week. As much as I pretended to be some kind of mentor, I knew I was nowhere near qualified enough. I was a fucking freelancer. What made me think I was qualified for any of this? Everything that had gone wrong recently was because of me and my carelessness. Now it was up to me to set things right. I wiped the last of my tears with my shirt, surprised to hear a crinkling of paper from my shirt pocket. I dug into my fingers and pulled out a small folded paper. Unfolding it, I saw the Morse code guide from Xavier staring back at me. I guess the bandits had either missed it or determined one piece of paper wasn't much of a threat. For now, I tucked it back in while I set to organizing my current living space. Might as well make it look nice to help clear my head. Thankfully, they'd given me a unit with not much in it. There were a few cardboard boxes scattered about the room, accompanied by a wooden shelf with various old newspapers stacked on it. Opening the remainder of the boxes revealed even more photo albums, all from the various families and lifetimes. Clearly the bandits had stuck whatever they didn't deem useful in the cells. I doubted there was a way I could fashion any sort of weapon with a picture. The sound of breaking the shelf would be too loud as well. Besides, a plank that big would cause more splinters than stealthy knockouts. I placed the bucket in the furthest corner and the box of photos in the adjacent one. I placed my blanket over a few kids' playmats and made a shoddy bed for myself. It wouldn't be comfortable, but it was better than sleeping on the cold, hard floor. The shelf sat next to a pipe that ran through the ceiling and floor. I hoped that it wouldn't start dripping and drive me further into insanity. Finally, I grabbed a stack of newspapers to use as a makeshift pillow. With that, my new room was organized. Even rearranging a few things that I had to work with had cleared my head a bit. Which meant it was time to do the same with my thoughts. This wasn't the first time things had gone to shit for me, and I doubted it'd be the last. There were plenty of unanswered questions rattling through my head. So let's organize. The best thing I could do was break the thoughts down into categories and go over them individually. Alright. Let's just start from the top. My ex-boyfriend runs a cult. Is something a few people get to say in their lifetimes, and somehow I ended up being one of them. I felt that familiar anger that accompanied thinking about Alistair begin to surface once more, threatening to overwhelm me. It was like a tsunami, destructive and aggressive on the surface, but the true power lingering just beneath. I wasn't even sure how I was supposed to process this. It was just something I had to take at face value and move on. Well, it was true we hadn't seen each other in years. In that time we had gotten to know each other and even lived together, it had never seemed he would go this far. He always seemed like a genuine guy, outgoing to make people comfortable and caring to all the strangers he met. From what he told me from when we were together, Alistair had been raised in an orphanage and took on the big brother role while he lived there. He helped the other kids sort through their problems, teach them how to read, and all that kind of stuff, all the way until he moved out at 18. In hindsight, his caring nature lent a lot to his newly minted persona as cult leader. He always had a almost regal nature to him, unintentionally ironic for the lion. Even after he moved out, he regularly sent money back there to help keep it in working condition. That was the kind of man I'd fallen in love with. The same man who would later betray me. When we broke up, it left me wondering how much of that side of himself he showed was real and how much was facade. Now I seem to have my answer. Yet a thought in the corner of my mind still nagged me. This wasn't like him. Alistair was an asshole, but he wasn't some villain. There had to be more going on here. He could have changed since we last spoke. I know for a fact the apocalypse changes people. Just look at what happened to me. I started out as someone lost, looking for their boyfriend and hopelessly useless, just like most people when it first began. Then over the course of a year, I'd grown into the founder of a group quite the opposite of this one, where I hoped give people safety. I'd fought monsters and won, broken through barriers of myself I didn't know were there, starting to slowly turn into the hero I'd always fantasized about being. Granted, I owed all that to Marshall. I used him as my motivator to get through this, often asking myself what would he do. In the end, it changed me a lot in unexpected ways. But Alistair, would he have gone this far off the deep end? I had no idea what his motives were, and it scares me. What does Alistair want? I thought back to our encounter earlier, how his eyes seemed so wrong. It was like an entirely different person resided there, yet I could see traces of the person I once knew. It bothered me in a way I couldn't quite describe, just another mystery I had to uncover. Rounding out my thoughts of the encounter, they brought out whatever the event of Wonderland was multiple times. Alistair had put quite the emphasis on the entertainment value of the spectacle, and that worried me. It had been impossible to glean any specifics from their vagueness, an effort I'm sure was intentional, except that we were the final two they needed to run it. Whatever the spectacle that was running tomorrow, the prisoners they had been gathering were the contestants, and this blatantly wasn't their first rodeo. I wasn't sure I'd be able to get much sleep tonight. Another person here who was important, yet I knew the least about. Though I'd met him once before, I wasn't even sure his name was Cal until today. He and Alistair had remained in touch clearly, to the point he was now an assistant in running this group. I'd heard plenty of talk of Pallet's cats, often that they were a very expressive species, that they were known to be easy to read because of this. Yet Cal seemed to show anything but emotion, his face neutral for the whole exchange despite everything that was happening. He had his own story I was keen to learn, starting with how he got those scars. It was unnerving to think that maybe they'd been the price of entry of joining this group. They looked significantly like burn scars, and that would align with the name of Ignited. I couldn't imagine he'd willingly give up one of his eyes, though. I shuddered at the thought. Was it some kind of initiation ritual? Was it forced upon him? Which brought me to that nod when we made eye contact earlier. I still wasn't entirely sure it was there, but I can't imagine why I would have made it up. He could have been with Alistair the past few years, seeing how he changed into the insane cult leader he is now. Given I was his ex, I doubted Alistair would want to talk much, especially considering things had ended in a huge, heartbreaking fight. Cal, on the other hand, might be the exact person I needed to fill in that gap and get some proper answers. I just needed to figure out how to talk to him alone. I found myself pacing as I thought of Xavier, worry spreading throughout my chest. Our last interaction, I couldn't manage to say a single word. I regretted it immensely. More than anything, I wanted to be there for the bat, to tell him things would be all right. Instead, the last look he'd given me was one full of anxiety. And I just watched them separate us. In my desperate bids to be a hero, I was acting far from heroic. I let my emotions get in the way and had floundered. Recounting my days with the bat, I'd grown to trust him significantly. I regretted the skepticism and suspicion I'd shown him so much of. I knew I had to be cautious, but he had saved my life that day. If that wasn't the biggest display of trustworthiness, I didn't know what was. I doubted him for days, even though I was already convinced. The trauma of that bunker was real, and I knew it from the start. The look in his eyes telling me everything. Guilt, worry, and regret all flooded me. I needed to do better for him, for myself, for everyone else that would need my help in the future. I felt myself recoil, the realization that Xavier was once again stuck in an enclosed space without any windows hitting me like a train. He had faced trauma after trauma since he had escaped that bunker. With a sigh, I tried to release the built-up tension I had been storing. I'd see him tomorrow at whatever horror wonderland turned out to be, and I'd hope we could talk then. The whole purpose of Xavier and I going to Haven had been to see why they had sent someone for me. It was possible it was due to the emergency of the bandits stalking them, but that didn't feel right. It had to be something else. The main reason that came to mind was that they had information about Marshall. It seemed like a long shot, but I couldn't help but hold out hope. Over the past year, I'd done everything I could to try and find him. Every survivor from Haven, or the other camps I'd met, I would ask about him. None of them had any answers. I scoured the whole city looking for him and came up with nothing, which is what kept me motivated. It was a lot stranger for there to be no trace of him than it was to follow a rumor to a dead end. He had to still be alive. I just needed to figure out where. Which once again brought me to the possible news at Haven and whatever they might have uncovered. I needed to get out of here and speak to them. That is, if they were okay. It seemed like overkill for them to shut down the camp over 3 bandits that could easily be scared away or shot at with arrows. Xavier and I had encountered the Silence at a relatively far distance from Haven, but maybe it had visited the area earlier. We still didn't know what its range was. A scout could have spotted it nearby and reported back, hence the lockdown. Another fated could have been in the area and prompted it. We'd done it for less in the past. I sighed. The theory's getting me nowhere close to enough to finding actual answers. These questions were important, but they could be saved for another day. I crumpled onto the makeshift bed, letting out another sigh of exhaustion. Too much was coming at me too fast, and it was wearing me down significantly. There were still many things I didn't know, so many questions I needed resolved that I just didn't have the answers for right now. I laid there for a while, thinking myself in circles. There wasn't anything I could do. No more pieces I could fit properly together. It was like playing one of those horrible glass puzzles that had grown popular just before the end. So many pieces in front of me, and I had no idea how many were still missing. All I could do right now, it seemed, was hope. So I closed my eyes, pulled up the covers, and let myself slowly drift off into the void of sleep. All right, so I'm gonna call it there. Even though I've recovered, my voice is still a little bit raw. But man, exes, cults, we in trouble. All right, well, this has been Fritz-Ay Says, and everyone have a nice day. Ciao.